Hello, everybody. We're waiting for folks to hop on, but I think we'll get started today. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Julie Lowe, Deputy Director of Programs here at Housing California, and I'm very glad to be with you today. And thank you for joining us for our town hall. It's been quite the active period here in Sacramento, and today we'll be covering the outcome of the state budget, which was passed in June, and its impact to affordable housing and homelessness programs in California. As many of you know, the 2026-27 budget includes major investments in housing and homelessness, including funding for the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, or HAP, the State Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, the LIHTC program, the Multifamily Housing Program, MHP, and also housing stability programs and new disaster rebuilding assistance. At the same time, there have been important trailer bill changes that will reshape the affordable housing finance system and homelessness funding moving forward. So today we're incredibly grateful for our guests who have joined us, who you will hear directly from about key highlights, changes, what partners should know, and what comes next. You'll hear today from two leaders from the newly formed California Housing and Homelessness Agency, launched earlier this month. Today, we're joined by Christina Moon, Deputy Secretary of Housing Finance. Her work focuses on the state housing funding programs that matter so much to our developers, local governments, advocates, and community partners. We're also joined by Dhakshike Wickrema, Deputy Secretary of Homelessness, and she brings critical leadership on homelessness policy, including HAP and the state's broader homelessness response system. Before I turn our attention to our headliners, I do want to do brief housekeeping. We'll be covering a lot today, and to make the most of the time we have with our guests, we'll be asking some prepared questions. There is some time after the conversation for audience questions as well. So if you'd like to ask questions, please submit your questions using the Q&A function in Zoom. We will also be distributing the slide deck after the town hall, and the link to the recorded webinar will also be included in a follow-up email. So I'd like to first start off with some openings and introductions from our guests. Then we'll move into questions, and I will turn to Deputy Secretary Moon, and then we'll pass it to Deputy Secretary Wickrema for some introductions.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks to your team at Housing California for having us. Really appreciate your partnership and everyone's input and support through this process. It's been a long journey, and we're really excited to share the outcomes of the work. As mentioned, I'm the Deputy Secretary of Housing Finance with the new Housing and Homelessness Agency. I've been with the state for about a year, but have a background in local government and affordable housing development, and really excited to join the state to make our systems work better, which is what a lot of this budget tried to do. Dhakshike.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Julie, for having us. My name is Dhakshike Wickrema. I'm the Deputy Secretary of Homelessness at the new California Housing and Homelessness Agency. Like Christina, I also have a background in local government and nonprofits, so very eager to be here and share some highlights from the budget with all of you.
Thanks again to you both, and we're just going to dive on in. So first question, I'm going to send it to you, Dhakshike. As of July 1st, the new California Housing and Homelessness Agency is operative, which will, of course, substantively shape implementation of this year's budget investments and trailer bill reforms. Before we dive into the budget, can you please remind folks of the structure and goals of this new agency as they are relevant to this year's budget and trailer bill reforms?
Absolutely. So on the slide here, which I think hopefully all of you can see that last year, Governor Newsom did what is called the reorganization plan, which was approved by the legislature. And what that did was it split what used to be called the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency into two. So there's a brand new Business and Consumer Services Agency, or BCSA, which really focuses on consumer protections. And then there's another new agency called the California Housing and Homelessness Agency, where both Christina and I work, and that is dedicated to addressing the full spectrum of housing needs. And as you can see in the slide, What it does, it has 5 departments. These are existing departments, some of them and some new. So the Department of Housing and Community Development, which leads housing policy, funding, and local government, is in our agency. The California Housing and Finance Agency, which provides tax credits, bond financing, down payment assistance, is also in our agency. There's a brand new, and Christina will talk more about this, California Housing Development and Finance Committee, which will align state housing programs with financing and just launched in July. There is the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, which Julie used to lead, and it is now a separate department within the new California Housing and Homelessness Agency, and it continues to drive California's strategy and accountability on preventing and ending homelessness. And then you had the California Civil Rights Department, which enforces civil laws, combats housing discrimination, protects the rights of all Californians, also within CHHA. So these 5 departments are within the new CHHA structure. The mission is to create a California for all by defending civil rights, funding and preserving affordable housing, expanding home ownership, and working to prevent and end homelessness statewide. Next slide, please. And here's the vision. Again, with all the departments that I mentioned, no surprise, it's a California where civil rights are safeguarded and everyone has a place to call home. So we're very excited to kind of embark on this with all of you because it's going to take all of us working together to achieve this.
Thank you, Dhakshike, for the overview. I'm going to send a question your way now, Christina. The budget and trailer bills include major changes to the Housing Development and Finance Committee, or HDFC, which includes how private activity bonds are allocated for affordable rental housing and how the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program will be administered by HDFC and the Strategic Growth Council. Can you explain what these changes are intended to accomplish and how they will affect affordable housing projects? And in particular, what stakeholders should know about the new administrative structure, implementation timelines, and any other opportunities there will be for public input?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I might talk for a while because there's a lot that happened.
Yeah.
And, as Dhakshike just covered, we spent since last July, so basically a year ago, when the reorganization plan was presented and approved, we've been kind of building the machine to actually implement this vision and the purposes of each of those departments, including the new one. HDFC is a really critical part and a really critical vehicle for how we're going to implement. So the kind of overall promise through the reorg is how can we make our finance system more coherent and then have this really, cabinet level focus on housing and homelessness to kind of support that. We have, and these slides will be shared, I think we mentioned afterwards, so we can make sure you get these. But HDFC is really created to be this developer-facing multifamily finance entity. So if you are a developer that's looking to create and or preserve affordable housing and you need subsidy, you would come to HDFC only. And that is the intent, is that we recognize there's a lot of fragmentation across the different entities, even within our own agency. But as mentioned, there was SGC, there's other places you could go. So we're really trying to create this main entity that you interact with through HDFC and have that be this true one-stop shop. And to do that, we created this public-facing kind of governing body called the Housing Development and Finance Committee Executive Committee that really kind of reflects the structure of other entities across the state, including CIDLAC and TCAC, where you have this public-facing kind of place and body that you can interact with, provide input on, and have transparency in how decisions are being made for really important financing decisions and program and policy decisions. So the whole point is, how do we get centralized? How do we get coordinated, streamline how you access the money, and have it be more transparent so that you understand not only what we're looking for and looking to invest in, but also how those decisions are made. And so the outputs are really to have a more consolidated, simplified system, a consolidated set of program requirements, which I'll speak to next, a single application process, a coordinated review, an award process. And this real priority for us is, with the fragmentation in the past, projects have had to wait. They've had to come back for more money. They still have gaps. They have uncertainty. So we're really trying to address that through the one-stop shop. Not just have it streamlined, but have it be fully funded. So you tell us what you need. You will see what the scoring rubric prioritizes. And then within that, you'll know you will get a full award or you won't. So you won't have to come back in these kind of iterative steps. So that's kind of big picture what we're trying to do. And, within that mission that Dhakshike just covered, HDFC is really focused on how are we alleviating the state's affordable housing crisis. We are creating more affordable homes by making our housing finance system simpler, faster, and more transparent. So this one-stop shop is really meant to do that. And then in the next slide, I will show some of the mechanics that we went through for the budget. Julie, as you mentioned, a really big part of that is not just all the subsidy programs. We have many, many subsidy programs that we were already consolidating under HDFC through the reorg, but also, we want to be able to pair those with bonds and credits. So the budget really moves the ability to have HDFC positioned to have the one-stop shop include tax-exempt bonds and 4% credits with the awards when requested. So overall, the structure, of course, is that CIDLAC administers and allocates bonds and credits, as well as TCAC for the credit side. And HDFC, I'm sorry, go back. The state gets a bunch of taxes and bonds, right? We wanted to create certainty to ensure that there's enough for housing. And so that is under the Qualified Residential Rental Project Program, so QRRP. 90% of those bonds are set aside for affordable housing. There's kind of a caveat there. If the CIDLAC committee decides they want to reduce it, they can through unanimous vote. But really, it's about the setting some certainty for how much housing we'll get out of the QRP. And yes, I will note that we kind of repurposed some of these slides from pre-budget approval. So it says proposed, but it is what will happen. And then of that 90%, half of the housing reservation of bonds would stay with the treasurer's office to allocate for folks who do not need any HDFC subsidy. And then half would go through HDFC to pair with its subsidy. And the subsidy will include multiple programs, which I'll get into next. And so there's essentially sort of two doors that you might go through, but either door is a one-stop for affordable housing funding. And then if you go to the next slide, part of that subsidy also includes a change to how the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities program works. We did not change the overall program, but really split the ASIC program into two separate allocations. We have 70% of the funding under ASIC going through HDFC's one-stop shop. So that's the housing allocation. And then 30% would stay with the Strategic Growth Council to administer for sustainable communities. There's still the same program goals. All projects must demonstrate GHG reductions, but really we're trying to make it coherent within HDFC's one-stop shop. So the next slide will show you some of the other subsidy programs, but the idea is that, I don't show you the before versus this after, but you know, most folks that have gone through this know there were multiple stops along the way. As I mentioned, you may have gone to local government, right? This kind of non-state investment box. You would have gone to your city or philanthropy or other places to seek some early money. Then you would come to the state and compete for multiple programs that may or may not be within the same kind of application process. And then you would go get your bonds and credits. And so we're really collapsing everything under HDFC to be the one-stop shop so that you have your final funding all at once to shorten that time frame and then remove some of that uncertainty of potential misalignment, different schedules across multiple funding sources. And a big part of that is we are doing the work to really unify the underlying guidelines and scoring that pulls all that together. In the next slide. So as I mentioned, the HDFC has an executive committee, and some of the big updates that came through the budget were expanding who is on that committee. So through the reorg, we already had 3 members identified. We have the secretary of CHHA, who acts as the chair. We had the HCD director, and then we had the Cal HFA executive director. So we had 3 voting members, but starting July 1st, named in statute are also the treasurer and the controller. So now we have 5 voting members. And then we have 3 new non-voting members. We have someone from the Department of Finance to really give that kind of financial fiduciary guidance. Then we have a county representative that's appointed by Senate and a city representative appointed by the Assembly. So overall, we've expanded that committee, and it's very much aligned with how TCAC is structured for their committee. So there's some nice parallels there. We also did some kind of clarifications for how the pipeline might work. So just clarified that, you know, recognize there's a lot of projects that already have past HCD awards that might just need bonds and credits. They could apply directly to select TCAC in 2027, but it would come out of our 50% for HDFC bond set aside. And there's some specifics about reauthorization by the legislature, you know, that 50% for HDFC. It goes through 2029, and it can be adjusted if it's not reauthorized to be 40 to 50% pursuant to demonstrated demand. So there will be kind of a re-upping that happens in a couple years by the legislature. And then that demonstrated demand is going to be happening every year. And this is what's really exciting for us, is that because we're kind of pulling it all together into a single place, we can have a better sense of demand and a clarity of the pipeline. So every year we'll have a survey by March that shows our anticipated use of bonds for that year. And to make sure that no bonds are wasted, any unused bonds would have to be returned for SIDLAC to reallocate. So HDFC would return those by September 1st, but likely happen much sooner because we'll know by March what we expect to use. So we expect September is really kind of a true update to finalize the allocation. I think that's kind of a big picture. And then, you know, I'll just say on timeline, there's a lot of work being done by staff at HDFC, HCD, and Cal HFA on consolidating guidelines. And we're really looking to have 2 rounds of really robust public comment, like we really want to hear from you all. So we're looking to issue draft guidelines under HDFC in August, probably mid to late August. There will be discussion at every HDFC executive committee meeting. We're looking at generally monthly meetings for HDFC through the end of the year and likely through 2027 as well. But really looking for 2 rounds of public comment by the end of this year. And so we can have this refinement, show the work, and by December have the executive committee adopt those guidelines, such that 2027 funding rounds really fall under those guidelines. And then in the next slide, you'll see for 2027, aiming for a issue a no fund or new portal. We're also building a new portal to accept applications. So by spring, we would have the first round of applications due and have the executive committee make awards by August. And then if there's money for a second round, we would plan for a second round in the fall. And then overall have this sort of annual cadence of funding rounds, draft guidelines, and then kind of preview of the next year's calendar. So having more regularity and transparency again for how we issue funds.
Thank you, Christina, for overviewing a little bit about the structure, some of the timelines associated with implementation, and of course, I think folks are always very eager and grateful for the opportunity for public input. So I'm going to dig in a little bit on a related topic. For you, Christina, for affordable housing production and preservation, the final 26-7 budget does include $500 million for state LIHTC program and $200 million for the MHP program. How should partners understand the importance of these investments, and what will the timeline, again, a timeline question, and process for allocation of these dollars look like in the context of these new regulations?
Yeah, it's really exciting to have resources for new housing. So thank you all for all the advocacy you've done to ensure we do have money to invest in the pipeline. I think we should hold on this slide because I don't want to steal Dhakshike's thunder on half. But I'll just say, all that work we did through the budget is really building the machine to be able to be the vehicle to deploy any and all dollars that are available, right? So, we had this kind of structure that is like 50-50 bonds, going through HDFC versus Treasurer's Office. That can shift with demand and need, and it's really going to be about what subsidy is available. So we're trying to build that machine to be flexible, nimble, but have clarity of what we are trying to invest in. And so really excited about having new MHP dollars to flow through that system. So we would go through those 2027 funding rounds, I would expect. And so we're going to kind of work through what that availability will be in the coming months. And then, what we worked through with the Treasurer's Office is let's put this bond structure into place because that's the main vehicle for a lot of production that we've had and a source of some of the friction that we've had and some of the opportunity we have with the reduction of the 50% test down to 25% test. So we have this kind of moment where we really wanted to capture that in statute. But we recognize through all of our engagement directly with folks through the reorg and also through all the 519 conversations, there's a lot to still figure out and resolve around 9% in state tax credits, but we didn't think it had to be in statute. So that's why you don't really see it reflected in the budget TBL. But that doesn't mean that we're not kind of planning and thinking and listening for how to approach that. So more to come and really encourage folks to engage there. That's where that kind of state tax credit question would flow as well. We have our own 2 rounds of public comment that will go through HDFC. In parallel, TCAC and CIDLAC have their own kind of reg updates that they'll be doing through their regular schedule, right? But we are working to really align so that we are in sync with how our funding should work together. So encourage you all to stay engaged with both of us. There will be a lot to track, but I'm gonna hopefully it's in the chat if not already. We have our HDFC website where you can see all of the public meetings, the materials get posted in advance, and you can have public comment remotely or in person. So really encourage you all to track that and stay engaged. Also just reach out, to folks at agency, but also, we have a new wonderful executive director at HDFC, Jonathan Klein and his team that are really working deeply on how to make these regs work for you all. So, you'll hear more from us and stay in touch. And then also please track what's going on in parallel under the Treasurer's Office.
Thank you, Christina. This next question is for you, Dhakshike. Another important topic. HAP Round 7, of course, is a major focus for local governments, continuums of care, service providers, advocates, and the final budget includes $900 million for the program. And the important changes to HAP were enacted through the trailer bill. What is the significance of this $900 million investment? And can you walk through the key changes that the trailer bill is making to HAP, including what local partners should be doing to prepare, when they can expect guidance, of course, disbursement timelines, and what implementation support will be available from the state?
Yes, and I think there's a slide which might be helpful here as I'm talking through some of the changes and guidance. So one, yes, Julie, $900 million has been allocated through the budget now for what will be round 7 of HAP. And really what this shows is a continued multi-year investment by the state of California through HAP, signified by the 7th round, right, which will go to continue to support. And on the slide here, you can see in case this would be helpful, there are all 58 counties that are eligible to receive HAP. All 44 continuum of care jurisdictions in California are eligible to receive HAP. And then finally, the 14 largest cities. That's any city with population that is 300,000 or more. And what you will see around the guidance, Julie and team, is that soon, in early August, HCD, which is the California Department of Housing and Community Development, will publish an amended NOFA around round 7, and there'll be some additional guidance on the disbursement criteria at that time within the guidance that they publish. It's important to note that this is, I think, hopefully something that grantees will be pleased about. There will be no new application because in round 7, what HCD will be asking for is basically supplemental information, piggybacking and enhancing on what people submitted for their round 6 application. So just a reminder, round 6 awards just were made over the last 6 months from January to June of 2026. So people just received their HAP round 6. And so because of that, given all the work around receipt and deployment of round 6, what HCD is going to ask for is some supplemental information regarding budget and how people hope to use their round 7 budget to enhance what they're using their round 6 monies for. And there will also be some threshold benchmarks that were outlined, which I'll go over in a little bit. But here on this slide, you will see some dates that people should be looking forward to and keeping an eye out for. So early August, there'll be the amended NOFA and additional guidance on the HAP 7 disbursement criteria. August 18th, if you are a HAP grantee, remember one of the 58 counties, one of the 44 continuums of care, one of the 14 largest cities. August 18th, there will be a monthly office hours that HCD will be hosting for the grantees, and they will share these materials once again and go over the disbursement criteria and any additional guidance on round 7. And then finally, August 25th and September 16th, HCD will host HAP 7 walkthrough webinars for the HAP grantees, again, making sure people understand what the new criteria will be around round 7. But again, I think the big kind of takeaway is it's no new application, it's more supplemental information as well as some threshold criteria that will need to be met to receive your round 7 awards. Next slide, please. And now speaking of the criteria, just a quick overview, but again, look forward to very detailed guidance from HCD in August. So similar to HAP round 5, and HAP round 6, to become eligible for round 7, HAP grantees have to show certain fiscal and programmatic progress. There are obligation deadlines on prior rounds, expenditure deadlines on prior rounds, as well as HDIS system performance measure benchmarks that have to be met. So those are standard kind of progress benchmarks that will continue to be sought from the grantees for round 7, but that's no different from round 5 and round 6. There are some new benchmarks related to 25 grantees. Those are the 14 largest cities. So once again, those are cities with population of 300,000 or more, and the 11 counties in which those larger cities are located. So again, saying these are only for the largest cities and the 11 counties in which those largest cities are located. This is not criteria that would apply to every HAP grantee, just for the largest cities and the 11 counties in which they are located. So there are two new criteria. One, if you are a large city, 300,000 or more, or a county in which a large city is located, you must show pro-housing designation before you get the first disbursement of round 7. And so HCD is ready to provide technical assistance as well as expedited review of any applications for pro-housing if you are a HEP grantee, to make sure you can reach and achieve pro-housing designation before the disbursement of the first round. If you don't have pro-housing designation by the time of the initial HAP 7 disbursement, HCD will work with you and give you 12 more months from the time of the disbursement to obtain it. But you must have pro-housing designation before you can receive the second HAP 7 disbursement. So again, there's a pro-housing designation requirement that will apply to the 14 largest cities and the 11 counties in which they are located. So that's number one. The second requirement that's new is a matching fund requirement. Sorry, my lights went off in the office. And grantees that are the largest cities and the counties in which they are located must demonstrate at least 35% local match for the initial disbursement of round 7. And then by the time they're ready to receive the second disbursement of round 7, they need to show an additional local match, so that across both disbursements, these larger cities and the counties in which they are located must have a total of 70% local match. So this requirement actually allows for a wide breadth of qualifying match sources. So look forward to getting more guidance on that when HCD provides that guidance in August. And there's a link on this slide, and I think the Housing California team will provide it as well, to the actual language from the Housing Trailer Bill, in case people are interested in seeing that breadth of qualifying match sources. But again, HCD will provide all of this in detail in August. Next slide, please. Oh, I think this is the next question, Julie, so maybe go back to the HAP slide until you ask me the question.
Well, we'll stick with you, Dhakshike.
Yeah.
So the budget also includes $100 million for the Department of Social Services Housing Stability Programs, which includes $75 million for HomeSafe and $25 million for the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program. How does the new agency plan to engage with California Department of Social Services to ensure these investments contribute to reducing homelessness statewide and, of course, support vulnerable populations?
Thank you. And now we can go to the next slide. Thank you, Julie. Julie, as you know so well, because you used to lead this organization, within the new CHHA, we have an entity, a new department called the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And what Julie just talked about around coordination, not only with CDSS, but multiple departments across state government, because housing and homelessness is very much an all of government issue. There's so much kind of interaction between health and housing, housing and climate, housing and transportation, housing and the Justice Department. This is why you have this Interagency Council on Homelessness, which really helps lead coordination across all state entities that are engaged in preventing and ending homelessness. So on this slide, and you can go on the CalICH website as well, there is an executive council that convenes multiple departments and entities. It's co-chaired by the new secretary of the CHHA agency, Tamika Moss, and her co-chair is Secretary Kim Johnson from the California Health and Human Services, to really kind of build that foundational collaboration between housing, homelessness, health, and human services, which really has a large kind of array of joint population and joint clients across their portfolios. But importantly, it also has cabinet secretaries from the California Department of Veterans Affairs, the California Office of Emergency Services, CDCR, Tribal Affairs, and the directors, Julie, as you mentioned, from CDSS that deals with welfare programs across the state, Department of Healthcare Services, which provides Medicaid and healthcare resources throughout the state, including the Behavioral Health Services Act, which provides money, ongoing funds to counties to really provide housing and services to folks who are experiencing homelessness and have behavioral health issues, either mental health issues or substance use issues. So I bring up the California Interagency Executive Council because through these council meetings and through the interactions with these agencies and departments under the auspices of CalICH, we are really driving kind of statewide coordination and alignment. And I encourage all of you, there are quarterly public meetings. The next meeting is in early September. And people can really join and hear how these cabinet secretaries, department heads, and also there are two community experts appointed by the state legislature, Veronica Lewis from Southern California and Professor Margot Cushell from Northern California, who really help kind of build expertise across a variety of issues related to preventing and ending homelessness. So that's one way, Julie, where we really think about how not only the CDSS connection, but connection with other departments and agencies that have investments in preventing and ending homelessness. And speaking of investments, this is the second link. There's a statewide action plan to prevent and end homelessness. It's 3 years long, so it'll end at the end of 2027. But the vision that is we are trying to achieve through the action plan is an equitable and just California in which homelessness is rare, brief, and never more than a one-time experience. And to do that, what the action plan has is 5 interconnected goals, which set measurable targets around how many people throughout the state are moving from being homeless to housed, how many people are kind of staying housed once they are housed. So you have these 5 action plan goals, really looking at how we can roll up the activity of all the state departments and agencies, as well as our partners on the ground and all the nonprofits that are working hard on this issue day in and day out, and see how we are doing around 5 interconnected action plan goals. And then finally, going back to your question on CDSS, Julie, the action plan has drop-down menus, and you can work on this on our website. You can see and filter based on population and department strategic investments that represent all the state funds and state administered programs that could contribute to kind of achieving these action plan goals. So that's the second way kind of we work with CDSS as well as other departments to think about strategic alignment. And then finally, in case people haven't been tracking, there's a new Assembly Bill 799, which by next summer, which will have public dashboards that pair the outcome data, which are being tracked already around how many people are being housed related to certain programs. For example, there's a HAP outcome dashboard on the HCD website that is powered by HDIS, and all the data being collected from the HAP grantees. And so you will have those kinds of dashboards around the outcome data plus the investment information. So you will have both the outcome data and the program data and kind of the fiscal investment information on public dashboards next summer. And that's pursuant to Assembly Bill 799. And as we work towards that, on the CalICH website, there's a statewide homelessness funding navigator, which again, anybody can look at to look at populations, departments, and the different types of funds that are available to really prevent and end homelessness, to see how we can really align and coordinate on all of state government approach. So not just CDSS, Julie, we're trying to do collaborations and kind of strategic thinking across all the state departments that may have investments that help people experience homelessness.
Thank you, Dhakshike and Christina. And as a reminder for those who are joining us today, there are links going out. There are a number of resources, a number of links, a number of references. They will go out in a follow-up email in addition to the video. And really want to thank you, Christina and Dhakshike, for preparing all the resources to bring forth to our people. Before we close out some of our prepared questions, I'd love to ask you each a final question before we head into the Q&A questions that our team has been working through. What is, for each of you, some advice you'd give to our partners to take away from today's discussion, and also a way that our field can be most helpful, recognizing that this is a true partnership to make all these things succeed, as the state moves into implementation on the broad set of things you all covered. And Christina, maybe we'll turn to you and give Dhakshike a break for a sec.
Sure. Well, I did want to mention that we didn't really cover it, but there's other stuff in the budget that happened. For example, we actually codified the reorganization plan, which it was law, but it wasn't codified. So now it's official. It's in the, you can look it up. But also a couple new efforts around, that really support the streamlining and efficiency goals that we have for state investment. We made some moves to reduce or waive local impact fees for affordable housing. We created a new disaster rebuilding fund that's going to be administered by CalHFA. So there's kind of more there that we weren't really going to talk too deeply about because there's plenty of content, but just acknowledging that. And a big takeaway from my perspective is there's a lot of change. And I recognize that that's going to be a really big shift for everyone. It's something that we've all been asking for, but it's happening and it's gonna be new and different. And we are trying to come in very open book and ask for your thoughts, your best ideas, your input. Help us understand what this means for your jurisdiction, for your region, for your type of population that you serve. We have almost an impossible task, which is we have this really beautiful, diverse state with a lot of different needs that we're trying to serve in a big way. And we want to make sure we don't lose that service when we go into this new system. So acknowledge that and also ask for your grace and engagement as we make these big steps. I'll pass it to Dhakshike.
Thank you, Christina. I think you heard this throughout the presentations today. We really encourage people to kind of come to us with ideas, kind of keep track of things we're doing. Christina mentioned the HDFC meetings. I mentioned the CalICH meetings. So really encourage people to stay active and kind of track all the things that are public. And then we also you'll see us, I'm sure, in different parts of the state. So we really want to encourage an open door policy and to keep your eyes open. We may be coming to the next conference near your home and having different panels and webinars. So just really want to encourage all of you to be partners with us and help us kind of as we continue on this journey over the next year or two.
Thanks again to you both, and we'll turn to some Q&A. It's been quite active. And maybe the first question's for you, Christina. Going back to something you touched on earlier. Do deeply affordable projects that do not need state funds have to compete in the non-HDFC pool? Or is there another path for these projects to secure tax credits?
As of how we've structured it currently, the difference between the paths that you take are really if you need HDFC subsidy. So there is going to be this transition year for 2027 where we're kind of flushing out the existing pipeline of awardees. So if you have a past award, and you just need tax credits and bonds, you would go to the treasurer's office. But moving forward, it really is determined by whether or not you need HDFC subsidy. That subsidy, it is going to be competitive, right? So it's not a change in kind of demand, I think. It's really just trying to make it easier and more legible for folks. That being said, as I mentioned, the treasurer's office is still going to have their own side of the shop. And they're still going to have their priorities as well, even just for the tax credit and bond only paths. So I think there's more to kind of define and, as our system develops and shifts, what that means for the treasure only path. I think that will kind of season, over the next year or so. So again, like, please do kind of keep watch and stay engaged with us both. We're working together and we really want to make this work for the field. So I think even if you do have a deeply affordable project, maybe you're just going for 9%. Maybe you're going for fours and bonds and you have a ton of local money like LA, right? So like those are good situations. And we hope that the treasure path is just as viable for those projects.
Thank you, Christina. We'll turn to you, Dhakshike. We've got a question about the opportunities for people with lived experience to offer input on the new agency, and of course, these programmatic changes, just knowing how critical that piece is.
Yes, thank you. There are two places where we have embedded within the California Interagency Council on Homelessness already, where you have members with lived experience and lived expertise. So one is the CalICH Lived Experience Advisory Board, and I think somebody will put a link to that. These are all folks who have lived experience from across the state, and they really provide kind of structure already that is embedded within the governance structure of CalICH, input and advice to the work of CalICH. So that's one, just wanted, but please, if anybody wants to kind of learn more about that, you can reach out to me or we can connect them to Megan Marshall, the director of CalICH. The second place where you have members with lived experience and lived expertise is there's an advisory committee at the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, and that is within statute. They provide guidance to the actual executive council. So just there are those two bodies, the Lived Experience Advisory Board that is made up of people solely with lived experience and lived expertise, as well as the Advisory Committee, which is a larger body that also includes people with lived experience and lived expertise, so that we are making sure we are getting that full comprehensive view from people who are experiencing homelessness, some of them actively and some of them formally, as we think about the next steps that we want to take.
Thank you. And we've got two more questions before we close, and it's been an active Q&A, y'all. So the next question, Christina, I think I'll send it your way. How will HDFC interact with federally and locally controlled funding programs? Just understanding how deeply tied they are.
It's a great question. And as both of us came from local government, I think it's so important to think about the funding ecosystem. What we are doing right now is just getting out of our own way as a state system, right? Like, how do we make our own money work better? That's like bucket number one of work. I think there's a lot of potential for deeper coordination with local governments moving forward, once we have that clarity at the state level. So we fully intend to have this kind of deeper discourse with local jurisdictions and again acknowledge there's so much diversity of capacity, funding availability, and leverage across local governments, cities, counties. Now we have, regionals, right, with BAFA, La Casa, and San Diego. We have housing authorities, really big range of the types of partners there. So we're trying to be thoughtful about creating a system that can encompass that range without kind of shutting out any region just because they don't have as much of that local leverage. So I think there's like a lot more to come as we issue that first set of kind of scoring so that folks understand what we're looking for. And then I do think on the federal side, locals administer their own kind of federal sources. We have our own federal sources that we administer. On the state side, we are considering how to capture the competitive developer-facing federal sources within our consolidated program. So even if officially HDFC is not in charge of federal, it's going to stay at HCD. We are thinking about how to make sure those dovetail well so that when there is opportunity to leverage those and layer them in, we can. So, as a kind of on the outside, our hope is that there's a little more agnostic approach to state money. It's really like, hey, this is the type of project that meets your policy goals. Tell me what money you might have for me. And of course, we'll try to keep that really clear, what, requirements are being met. We've really stripped back to what's universal across our sources versus what's bespoke to each program. But for the user, we want to make it a little less specific and more about here's the money you can have for your project because you met, these scoring priorities. And that can only kind of evolve over time with our local partners as we see how that works through the pipeline.
Thank you. And a similar question for you, Dhakshike, around different stakeholders that might be very curious about some of this. How would you suggest smaller jurisdictions and COCs think about their role in HAP implementation, especially if some of the new requirements apply more directly to larger cities and counties?
So the first thing I would say is in round 7, the other COCs are still, they have the regular requirements, right? I just want to make sure there are 2 new requirements that only apply to the largest cities around pro-housing and local match. Doesn't mean that the other HAP grantees, as I said at the top of the slide, they still have, everyone still has requirements related to their fiscal obligation and programmatic obligations that goes to all 44 COCs, all 58 counties. And I want to say that simply because HAP Round 7 is now requiring pro-housing only from the largest cities does not mean that you don't need to get pro-housing if you're a smaller city, because there is a big universe out there of people who have achieved pro-housing designation. And when you receive pro-housing designation, there are certain incentives built in where you are going to the top of the queue for other funding programs, speaking of some of the funding programs that Christina mentioned. So I just want to just be clear that while in the slide we are talking about HAP now requiring for round 7 pro-housing and local match for the largest jurisdictions and the counties in which they are located, does not mean that the smaller jurisdictions don't have to meet other requirements. We are just not coming to them and requiring pro-housing for HAP round 7. They can still on their own voluntarily seek pro-housing designation, which is a good thing for the people who live there, to promote housing development and really think about what your community needs around affordable housing. So that would be what I would just say, that this does not negate smaller jurisdictions' responsibility just as being good stewards of their communities to achieve pro-housing or do other things to kind of do more around building housing capacity in their communities.
Thank you to you both again. And thank you for joining us today and sharing your time, your expertise, your perspective with our statewide network. We know that it's a busy time. You talked about a whole lot of things that are making you guys a lot busier. And we're grateful for your partnership. And also thank you to everyone who joined us today. We know that much of our audience are working on this issue, building homes, serving people experiencing homelessness, formerly experienced homelessness, advancing local policy, organizing communities, and advocating for resources that California needs. So Housing California will continue to work with our members and our partners to track implementation, share information, and advocate for the long-term investments and policy changes needed to ensure that every Californian has a safe, stable, affordable place to call home. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. There are some key links that would love for you to turn your attention to. Our social media handle, of course, our roadmap home, and of course, our Yes on Prop 1 website. Thank you again to you, Christina and Dhakshike, and to our audience. Have a great day.